agreement? Because according to the Washington establishment, it wasn't. And then that big question, is Pakistan playing a double game and not being an honest broker? Joining me on India First is Professor Sierra Claire, foreign policy analyst. She joins us Professor Claire joins us from California. Roxana Chigini is an Iranian cultural analyst and advocate for democratic transition, joins us from Germany. Sushant Sareen is senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Also with me is senior journalist and author Sandeep Unithan. Professor Claire, there are conflicting reports coming in from the United States. Vice President J.D. Vance insists the U.S. ceasefire plan never included Lebanon. There may be some misunderstanding in Iran. Is there an impression that this misunderstanding may have been created by Pakistan?
Well, I think that what I'm hearing from the White House is that Iran has created a lot of these misunderstandings by releasing a document that was an old 10-point plan that had already previously been rejected. So we haven't actually seen the 10-point plan that Iran and the United States are dealing with right now. That being said, Pakistan, we've also heard that they sent different versions of the plans to each people as these messages have been being passed back and forth. So there certainly could have been some mistranslations. There are messages that have to go through, 3, 4, 5 people or more. And so there certainly could have been a possibility that something got changed around.
Okay, so you think it's a game of Chinese whispers, or Pakistan sent different drafts to different people, or different drafts were sent at different times and not a final version? Where do you think was this message lost, Professor Claire?
Well, it's hard to say without being knowing the what's actually going on in the room. But I think that the a misunderstanding or the confusion over the Lebanon ceasefire could stem from two things. Number one, as I said, the message being passed through so many people, including Pakistan, and maybe some mistranslations, maybe some miscommunications there, or the Iranians who are trying to use the media to put out something that they want to have happen. And so this is what we've seen them do, throughout the conflict, is basically put out things that just are not true at all, and they're trying to basically speak it into existence. So I think both things are possible, and I think that Pakistan could play a role in both things.
Okay, let me bring in Sushant Sareen, because few people watch Pakistan as closely as Sushant does. Sushant Sareen, the draft message put out by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif gives the impression that the draft came from elsewhere, but a subsequent message posted by Shahbaz Sharif says, and I quote, "Pleased to announce that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America, along with the allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon, effective immediately." Has Pakistan played a double game here, sir?
Look, I wouldn't be surprised if they have. Anybody who has done a property deal in Delhi, for example, or I suppose even in Lahore, it's not going to be any different. When you are getting two sides to meet and one side, and in this case, the United States, it seems to be extremely desperate for a deal, because that is if you read the Financial Times report, it's clear that for weeks they've been telling the Pakistanis to get the Iranians to agree to some kind of a ceasefire. And clearly, despite Donald Trump's genocidal threats, the Iranians were not balking. So quite clearly, the Americans were very desperate. And when you have this kind of a situation, what you try and do is that, okay, let me exchange different messages with different people, promise both the sides separate things. At least that will stop the fighting and get them both on a table, and then maybe things will move on from there. Perhaps that could have been what was attempted by the Pakistanis, because it's very clear, unless the Americans simply do not read anymore or they cannot comprehend what is being written, that it was very clear that Shahbaz Sharif has written that Lebanon is included. But when you read Donald Trump's post on Truth Social, he doesn't mention anything about Lebanon. He talks about an immediate ceasefire, and he talks about the Strait of Hormuz will be
Yes.
completely, which again is not exactly the case because the Iranians have not. Iranians are saying we have opened the strait, but there, you will have to come through us because there are some technical difficulties, so you have to come through us. So it's not open. It's under their control. They are not giving up control, and they are not going to give up control. And there is damn all that the Americans can do about it. So
Okay.
that is where we are at. It's a very dangerous situation. We don't know if these talks are going to work. We don't know whether this ceasefire will even last the 2 weeks that people have been talking about. As we
Okay.
speak, there are reports of a massive buildup of American forces in the region, which
Yes.
means that there is an apprehension that there could actually be a ground attack either on one of the islands or some parts of the mainland Iran. We don't know. So let's wait and see. Keep fingers crossed.
Oh, absolutely. And Sandeep Unnithan has some details on the build-up that's taking place right now. But before I come to Sandeep, Roxana Chigini joins us from Germany. And Roxana, this initial message posted by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, it does not mention Lebanon by name. And that's why we put out both the messages. In your view, is this a deliberate misunderstanding created by Pakistan, or this is a game of the Chinese whispers? It's lost in translation since it's that Pakistani English or Urdu that's happening, and Persian, Farsi with Iran, and American English with the Americans. So somewhere down the line, the message got it's lost in translation.
I think this misunderstanding is well chosen by Iranian government. They are absolute master to create misunderstanding, absolute master of playing with the words, and they have done it for 47 years. They have done it deliberately, and maybe the Lebanon was not involved in this agreement at all from the beginning, and then suddenly they did it. Obviously, suddenly they come and say, "Oh, what about Lebanon? Because we have Hezbollah there." That should be in the deal. But by the way, the ceasefire were not actual from the beginning. Iranians started to bombing UAE the next day, and it's
Yes.
just a confusion. It's just a big circus, political circus. I think Qatar tried to be the middle person. Now Pakistan tried to play a political role in this situation and gain some attraction, gain closeness to Iran. That's what I believe. I think that a conversation and the agreement and the meeting should be between two countries. As long as we have a third country with a totally different culture and different language, Iran used this situation and come with a misunderstanding and come with wanting something else. And this is by Iran. That's what I believe.
That's very interesting. You should mention that a conversation is between two countries. What is a third country with a very different culture doing this? Sandeep, I want to quote the initial message of Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif so that there's no confusion. He says, and I quote, "Diplomatic efforts for peaceful settlement of the ongoing war in the Middle East are progressing steadily, strongly, and powerfully with the potential to lead to substantive results in the near future. To allow diplomacy to run its course, I earnestly request President Trump to extend the deadline for 2 weeks." Pakistan, in all sincerity, requests the Iranian brothers to open the Strait of Hormuz for a corresponding period of 2 weeks as a goodwill gesture. We also urge all warring parties to observe ceasefire everywhere for 2 weeks to allow diplomacy to achieve conclusive termination of war in the interest of long-term peace and stability. There is no specific mention of Lebanon in the initial post as there was in the second post of Shahbaz Sharif. He seems to have quietly inserted Lebanon in his second post, Sandeep.
Yeah, absolutely, Gaurav. And you have to see who the puppet master behind these tweets are. And there's a lot of speculation that it is possibly the United States who was putting out those draft tweets, sending it to him. And of course, they pasted an original copy. The draft tweet was pasted as though it was the final tweet, and that led to speculation as to who was writing these tweets and passing it on to them. So that's very clear that it is possibly the United States, because as Sushant was mentioning, that there's a lot of enormous pressure on the United States for a ceasefire because, as we've been discussing, Gaurav, there are huge deadlines in front of Trump. He's got things to do this year. He has that meeting with Xi Jinping on the 14th and 15th of May in Beijing. That's going to be a huge one. After that, you have the 4th of July celebrations, 250th anniversary of the United States. And after that, of course, is the most crucial one for Trump, the politician, which are the US midterms in November. So he's looking at these three very big events, and he cannot be seen as stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, unable to get a country whose air force he has destroyed, whose navy he has destroyed, but somehow the most powerful country in the world can't get that defeated country, in his words, to open the Strait of Hormuz. So Pakistan playing a double game, Gaurav, you said it. You can't trust Pakistan with this, something as sensitive as this. And these talks, Gaurav, I mean, for the kind of forces that are being moved into theater, you have the USS Boxer that is headed there. It hasn't taken a U-turn and gone back to the United States. You have one carrier strike group heading from the Atlantic towards the region. That hasn't taken a U-turn either. The US is steadily building up forces, and as Trump just said in his Truth Social post, they're locked and ready to move in. So these talks, for all practical purposes, Gaurav, these are among the most fragile talks possibly of this century. It's like negotiating, sitting in a minefield. Anything could go wrong. One explosion, and there will be a series of, cascading explosions, and that will be the end of these talks. That's how fragile the situation really is, Gaurav.
It indeed is. And Professor Clare, the New York Times claims that White House knew of Shahbaz Sharif's post even before it was put out in public domain. In fact, they've gone to the extent of arguing that White House was directly involved in shaping the message. If that is true, would that indicate White House furiously backpedaled on the ceasefire on the Lebanon front, with Israel continuing to strike Hezbollah? That initially perhaps they were okay with it, or they didn't wargame it. When Israel continued to strike, there was furious backpedaling by the United States?
Well, I've heard from the White House and the administration that Lebanon was never in part of the deal, and that's just not something that they were ever willing to discuss. So I don't know that there was backpedaling. As you said, there was that post that made that, it seemed like the White House had been involved in shaping some of the messaging. And that's a very interesting case. The White House and President Trump specifically have been building up kind of a relationship with Pakistan over the past year. And so it is possible, that they were sending a message or sending instructions about the first tweet that you showed. And then there was that second post that was underneath it, maybe that was added on. So I do think, the White House is they have an extensive communications team that's very concerned with messaging, even, with our partners.
Okay, Sushant Sareen, the same report, would it not prove that Pakistan is just a messenger boy, a broker, and not a party in these peace talks? I mean, they're just doing what India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, said a couple of days back. They're just dalals.
Of course, I think that's a no-brainer, Gaurav. They are brokers in this. They're not a party. They probably are the event managers, the marriage hall providers, but they're not going to be part of the confabulations that will happen out there. I'm not sure if they'll be in the room or even on the table. So one is that. But look, as far as these tweets are concerned, when the first tweet goes out, it does not mention Lebanon. I would suspect that the Iranians who have been insisting that the ceasefire has to extend all across the region would have said, why haven't you mentioned Lebanon? Because that is where the Israeli attacks are taking place. So the Pakistanis, to save the talks, would have sent the second tweet, right, mentioning Lebanon. The Americans would have probably ignored it. Assuming that the Americans are saying the right thing, and you can't say that about America anymore, given the kind of stuff which is happening in the White House. So let us, for a moment, imagine that the Americans would have let it pass. Now, look at the sequence of events. Initially, J.D. Vance says that Lebanon was not part of the deal. There has been a misunderstanding. And then when the Iranians continue to insist on it, and this tells you about the sheer desperation of the United States to get some kind of a ceasefire so that they can cut and run from this place. You have them leaning on the Israelis to agree for not bombarding Lebanon for another 2 weeks.
Okay.
What does that tell you? That the Iranians insisted on this particular thing. The Americans have kowtowed to the Iranians. The Pakistanis were doing that double game, that let them all come out here, let them sit across a table, and once that happens, maybe things will move in the right direction. So they have played that broker game, which is so familiar to all of us in Delhi NCR, right? But whether this thing will finally go ahead, given the kind of divergent positions and the kind of maximalist demands that the Iranians are making, perhaps it's an overthink from the Iranian side, but they think that they are on the winning side. Despite all the damage and destruction done by the United States, the US has not achieved anything at all, and Iran is now top dog in the region. It is the regional hegemon, whether anybody likes it or not.
It's top dog in the region, Roxana Chikini, and these developments indicate that the US does not have the stomach to take Operation Epic Fury to its logical conclusion. There is no regime change, and a wounded regime in power perhaps is even more hardline, more dangerous, and that is why they've now closed the Strait of Hormuz to send across this message: not even the #1 power in the world can make us open it.
Yeah, about the Strait of Hormuz, actually, it should be an international navigation platform for all the countries in the world, and this is really a very bad policy and not acceptable that Iran wants to decide about it. Iran has a plan. Iran wants to stop Israel. Iran wants to stop USA. Iran wants to be the bigger winner. And they are always using the excuses. They are also creating the confusion. They are the master of it. They want to have a break. But the fight with this regime is not only the fight of USA and Israel with this regime. 47 years Iranians are fighting against this regime. They are bullying the whole world. I don't want to think 1 minute that USA will want to stop it. I hope that they don't want to stop it. I hope they continue with the plan that they started. I hope Israel continue with the plan and they destroy every power that they have in this regime. And then we will be ready for the regime change. Regime hasn't changed. The winning is not just a statement. Peace is just not a statement. The fact is that real people are on the fire. And this should be changed and this should be continued until the regime is absolutely, then the whole world, the Lebanon will have peace. Nobody has Hezbollah in Lebanon. Then there will be the peace between Pakistan, India, USA, Australia. And I hope that
India will ensure there's peace with Pakistan because there's nothing that speaks the language of peace better than the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile. That's clear, Sandeep. But for the moment, we will talk about Israel, we'll talk about Iran, and we'll talk about the United States of America. Because Pakistan understands one language, and that is BrahMos ki bhasha when it comes to India-Pakistan. But Sandeep, the quest for freedom in Iran, has that failed? The regime is wounded, battered, but it is intact. It exercises total control over the country and the Strait of Hormuz. Is the US today worse off than where the situation was on the 27th of February before the bombing started on the 28th?
Well, without a doubt, Gaurav, you saw the beginning of the year, there were widespread protests in Iran. That's when President Trump asked the Iranians to basically rise up against their government. And when they did, the protests were brutally crushed. The US was nowhere in sight. February, the United States appears. They conduct a 40-day bombing campaign where thousands of people have died. They've been wounded. A lot of civilians have died. Now, that is going to turn people against, an aerial bombing campaign. We have seen that through history, that aerial bombing, never, despite whatever President Trump has been saying, there is going to be no Iranian who would want their country to be bombed the way it has been. And that is going to be counterproductive for the United States, because that popular upsurge, that popular awakening, which they hoped would happen, a 1979 kind of moment where the people of Iran rose in revolt and the Shah had to flee. That is clearly not happening, not now and not in the near foreseeable future either, Gaurav. So that these are.
So let me quickly, bring in Professor Clare to understand what should one expect from the peace talks, given that there is no middle ground. Whether it's on the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's on the issue of Lebanon, whether it's on enriched uranium or the missiles that Iran wants to continue to make and launch. There are 4 or 5 critical issues on which there is no meeting ground. What are your expectations from the peace talks should they happen in Islamabad?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, we have CENTCOM Commander Bradley Cooper, who just put out a statement this morning, I think, who said that all of America's objectives in this operation were achieved. So I don't think there's any capitulation from the American side. We maintain quite a bit of leverage over Iran still. And if the peace talks don't go the way we want, we can still continue with what we need to do in Iran, especially with regard to the enriched uranium. In terms of what to look for in these peace talks, I do think they're going to happen. I think that we need to see if Iran is going to take this seriously. Are the people who are in charge in Iran right now going to have a behavior change where they're not going to act like they were in the first round of peace talks? Thankfully, all those leaders have been eliminated, so we're dealing with a new set of people, and we need to see if they're going to.
That's not actually true. Permit me. Whatever Admiral Cooper may be claiming, 40 days of bombing, the regime remains in power. The son has replaced the father. The president of the country remains the same. The foreign minister of the country remains the same. The speaker of parliament remains the same. The foreign minister was leading talks in 2025. He was leading the talks in February 2026, and he's leading the talks along with, of course, the speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, when they meet, if they meet in Islamabad day after tomorrow. So I don't really see what has changed. The ideology and the regime remain intact. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, despite the world's most powerful navy, 11 aircraft carrier battle groups, all the nuclear-powered submarines and ships. The Strait of Hormuz remains shut, madam.
Well, the United States has the capability to open the strait. It would take a large commitment, more troops, more forces, possibly more casualties. So those are the considerations that the American side weighs. But it's just not our strait. It's not something that we use. It's not very strategically important to us. So that's why we've been having conversations with our partners, our NATO allies, who have surprisingly shown very little interest. But there's also other partners. There's Gulf partners, who use the strait. So all of those things are still, left to be decided. But that's part of the reason why the United States hasn't, just gone full on to open the strait, unilaterally. We're having conversations. We're bringing other people in on that. And with the talks, I think as I said, I think if the Iranian side takes them seriously, President Trump and his team are willing to, negotiate. They're willing to try to work something out. But if the Iranian regime just treats this like a delay tactic, if they disrespect the negotiations, that will be the thing that makes it fail.
Okay, the last 30 seconds that I have on this part of the show, Sushant Sareen, a section in the media in Pakistan believe both Asim Munir and Shahbaz Sharif should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Your take on it?
Yeah, from a time when they were all jumping up and down to give a Nobel Peace Prize to Donald Trump, to now when they are saying that the Nobel Peace Prize should be given to Shahbaz and that failed marshal. The point is that they're pitting them directly against Donald Trump. So good luck on that. Donald Trump might feel cheated. Secondly, what if this peace moves don't last? If they don't survive? If this entire so-called peace process collapses? There's a lot of slip between the cup and the lip on this. And despite American claims that they've achieved all their objectives, there's not a single objective they have achieved, apart from killing Ali Khamenei. What have they achieved? They bombed the Iranian military and the navy and everything. But the Iranians, you ask anybody who's unbiased, and they'll tell you that the Iranians have emerged as the clear victors. It's been a strategically resounding victory for Iran because they have now established their dominance and they are dictating terms to the United States. Just now, the Iranians are tweeting that we have told the Americans that if they cannot stop Israel from bombing Lebanon, the talks are off. And the Americans have ensured that this will happen. They're now just now they're tweeting this.
Yep.
So quite clearly they're dictating the terms. The Americans have themselves said that the 10-point program that the Iranians have given us, although there's some controversy on what those 10 points are, is the workable basis on which negotiations will take place. So the negotiations are not taking place on the American wish list. The negotiations are taking place on the Iranian wish list. And yet, if you think that America has achieved all its objectives, then please tell me what those objectives were.
Because if America's main objective, and of course we'll have a separate debate on that, if America's main objective was to ensure that Iran's unable to project power beyond its borders, Iran's actually projecting power way beyond its borders, not just at the Strait of Hormuz, but also at Bab al-Mandab, and is trying to ensure that Lebanon, the Hezbollah, is not targeted in Lebanon. Now, if America buckles on this issue, we'll know in the next 24 hours, and then we'll know whether America has met any of its objectives or whether Iran continues to call the shots. I want to thank all my guests. The situation on ground zero, many thanks for joining me,